So we're a couple of rounds into the Rugby Championship, and the Pacific Nations Cup is also underway. So there has been a little bit of movement around in the Rugby World Rankings. Most of the teams are pretty stable, to be fair, but with more upcoming games and Rugby World Cup on the way, there is much more to be seen in the way of movement, I'm sure. To go through the top 14 teams, the ones that I can fit on my whiteboard anyway. New Zealand are still at the top on 91.54. That draw at home didn't do them any good in terms of their rankings. There was potential for Wales to go above if the All Blacks had lost that one by, I think, 16. But obviously it was a draw, so there was nothing to do in the way of their rankings. Wales, Six Nations champions, still there on 89.96. Ireland still third on 88.69. That's kind of the top three, and then there's a wee gap of a couple of points between third and fourth, which is now South Africa. South Africa are the big winner on the board at the moment. They are up one spot. They passed England only just. They're on 86.30, so that draw was beneficial for them, I guess, away from home against the number one team. Kind of fairly rewards them for that. England 86.27, so really just that 0.3 difference, so very little in that. Australia still there in sixth. They're getting a lot of grief from rugby fans around the world about not performing. Some would say they don't deserve the sixth spot, but hey, it is what it is. They had a win over the Pumas recently, so their spot is stable. Scotland round out the front half of my board, so seventh on 80.17, and that's kind of fitting because that's where the 80s cut off. I guess it is interesting that there's a big gap between England and then the rest. So the top five is kind of your, I guess, main contending teams, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then there's a bit of a gap again. So you got Scotland there. France not too far behind them in 8th, 79.42, and then Fiji, who beat France last year. They lost to Japan, but they haven't moved on the rankings. They are still in 9th, 76.98. Argentina in 10th, 76.81. I think there's in terms of I was talking about feeling with the Australians, there's feeling that the Argentinians are better than their world ranking shows. But that being said, they lost to the higher ranked team recently. So the only way to go up the board is pretty much to get wins. So that's something they need to do. To be fair, some of those guys are pretty tired after the end of a long Super Rugby campaign. Japan in 11th, 76.21. That victory over Fiji has certainly done them a bit of confidence for the World Cup because it wasn't that long ago that Fiji beat the Māori All Blacks. So how well Japan are going to go in that pool is going to be an interesting one to watch, especially when they're at home. Georgia 74.42. Italy are the big winners also, along with South Africa. They've gone up a spot. Didn't have to play a game. Maybe that's the best way to do it. 72.04, so there's a bit of a gap between them and Georgia. Tonga down one, despite getting a win over Samoa, 71.89. That's where my board ends, but I mean, obviously the rankings keep going on. USA's in 15th, Samoa's in 16th, Spain, Romania, Uruguay, Russia 20, Canada 21, and then I think the lowest ranked country in terms of world rankings that's going to the World Cup, I think, is Namibia on 23rd spot, 61.01. But there's a lot of talk of them, I guess, doing a wee bit better than their rankings. Like Canada is on 21. I guess there's a bit of talk about them being potentially the weakest team, but they're in a tough pool, so it may not make much difference. But they did get pretty hammered by the USA the other day in the Pacific Nations Cup. So yeah, I mean, just looking at that, it is a pretty interesting one. You look at those top four: New Zealand, Wales, Ireland, and South Africa. Three of them are interesting in that, I mean, you might think, hey, top four teams, maybe those will be the top four for the World Cup. Maybe that's the semi-finalists, but it can't be because Ireland is going to play either New Zealand or South Africa, which is a pretty tough spot to be in. But that's the way it's going to go, pretty much. So not all of those three teams can make the semi-final. One of them will be going home at the quarterfinal stage. So that's going to be brutal for whoever that happens to, because they're all pretty strong teams. In terms of what's going to happen with the upcoming games, USA can go up to 13th if they beat Samoa. I think it's this weekend with the Pacific Nations Cup. Samoa likewise can pass USA if they get a win. Fiji can potentially drop if they lose to Canada, but that seems pretty unlikely. Tonga can go up if they beat Japan. I don't think Japan's going to gain much from beating Tonga in terms of the rankings. Wales is perhaps one of the most interesting ones, not for this week, but for the coming Rugby Championship games. They can potentially take #1 spot if New Zealand lose, I think even by a point, to Australia. A lot of Wales fans have commented on the channel that they would rather not that be the way they get #1 spot. If they get it, they want it to be a victory that they've earned themselves rather than just somebody else having a loss. So I guess there's a bit of credit to that, but that's a potential thing that could happen. South Africa will be down. I mean, they're very marginally ahead of England at the moment, so they will be below England if they lose to Argentina in their next game. Likewise, Argentina can bump up if they win. So there's plenty of talking points with the Rugby World Rankings. It's not always true that these teams are the strongest. I mean, some of these teams don't get the chances that they might. Italy's got it pretty tough being in the Six Nations. I'm sure they love being in the Six Nations in terms of being in a top-tier competition, but it doesn't do their World Rankings any good when they get hammered from time to time in the Six Nations. So, yeah, how do you guys think these rankings represent the strength of the teams currently? Do you think anyone is perhaps a bit undersold on here? Like I said, Argentina is potentially one. Maybe Italy is another. But the odds of them getting out of their pool also look pretty tough. Do you think any teams are particularly overrepresented? Again, some people would point to the Wallabies based on recent form, but hey, they did get a win over what was supposed to be a bit more of a challenge against Argentina. But then again, it was a pretty close game in the end. Yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts on the rankings, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.